chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening, friends, and welcome back to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and tonight we venture beyond the edges of light into places where what you almost see is worse than anything standing right in front of you. Tonight's journey explores grief, obsession, guilt, and the things that move when you think you're all alone. Sometimes it's the past. Sometimes it's a reflection. Sometimes it's you. And with me once again for tonight's descent into the uncanny is my trusted co-host, a man brave enough to walk into a darkened room without checking for strings first, Malcolm Blackwood.
Thanks, Otis. This evening's stories show that sometimes the real horror isn't what's lurking in the shadows. It's what the shadows already know about you. 5 stories of desperation, distortion, and the dreadful things that happen when you pull too hard at the wrong thread.
So take a deep breath, friends, and don't be expecting it to last, because once you step past the light, it's not your world anymore. Before we chase down those shadows into the walls, a quick message for those who prefer their nightmares uninterrupted.
Join our patrons area for just $7.99 a month, or save big with a yearly plan. You'll unlock ad-free episodes, early access to chilling content, and a deep library of stories where even the bravest hesitate to tread.
Just visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons, and you'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where we promise you're never truly alone.
Support indie horror, keep the lights dim, and feed the stories that feed your fears.
Now then, let's step into the dark together. We begin with grief, the kind so deep it refuses to stay buried. A mother haunted by loss seeks to cross an invisible line, but the longer you knock at the veil, the more likely something else will answer. This is Beyond the Walls of Death by Kyle Harrison, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. I've known that Melissa has had a problem for some time now, and I'll be the first to say that I told her she needed to get help. We tried therapy, tried rehabilitation, but inevitably she became fixated on the idea. And because I became part of the problem rather than the solution, a price is being paid. It'll be 2 years this March since everything changed for us. Our little boy, Ryland, had just turned 7, searching for adventure everywhere he went. We decided to take a family trip to the beach, just a 45-minute drive from where we lived. It was the first time Ryland had ever seen the ocean. I still remember the smile on his face when his toes touched the sand. Melissa was eager for him to experience the water. Everything seemed so calm that day. My wife's an experienced surfer and had brought her board with her in case the weather permitted her to take a few waves. When he saw the board, Ryland immediately wanted to join her. First, she said no, it wasn't safe. I was the one who convinced her it would be fine. I told myself he'd be safe out there in the water as long as she was by his side. I stood near the edge to get my camera out and film the whole thing. It became a memento of disaster. The two of them climbed onto the board, and she encouraged Ryland to feel the water as she paddled away from shore. The waves were starting to climb, and I kept a good angle to watch them move. Ryland was having so much fun. They both were. It all ended so quickly. I still don't know what went wrong. A strong north wind came out of nowhere and knocked her board back. At first, she had complete control of it. Then the board shook. Ryland panicked. He fell backward into the water, and I lost sight of them. Immediately, I dropped the camera and shouted to them. No response. My heart hammered as I ran toward the surf, dipping my head under the water to look for them. There was no sign they were nearby. I kept shouting, trying to find them. Other swimmers also saw my frantic attempts and came running to help. Then I saw little Ryland, his body face down in the water. He had struck a rock, and blood was gushing from his skull. Was he even conscious? I carefully turned him over and tried to do CPR, compressing his chest as I searched for signs of life. His eyes were rolled back and his skin was a polished white color. How much water had he taken into his lungs? I kept pushing, trying to force him to breathe. His body jerked only from the action I was performing. I slapped at his cheeks and checked for a pulse. There was nothing. Desperate, I tried again, pressing my lips to his cold body as others gathered around to see if he would make it. Each second that passed felt like an eternity. I didn't stop, not until someone had to physically pry me from his body. I couldn't stop. This was my child, and he was gone. Amidst all of this, I heard others shouting that they had found another victim of the wave. I knew it had to be Melissa. I stood over our son's lifeless body in a daze as they pulled her from the water. Another surfer gave her mouth to mouth. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I was convinced I had lost both of them. I didn't even let hope enter my heart until I heard her gasping for air and saw water spurting from her mouth. The surfer turned her to the side, keeping her there as she coughed up more salt water and bile. I was still staring at Ryland, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. It had only been 10 minutes since they went into the water. 10 minutes ago, he had been smiling. Now he was gone. Melissa became distant after the incident. Somehow we made it through all the motions, preparing a funeral, burying our son, but I could tell each day was torture for her. A part of our soul died that day, and she was especially affected. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I knew that things weren't going to get better, but I never anticipated they would actually get worse. It was only a month later when the first incident occurred. I'd just come home from work and heard the bathwater running upstairs. At first, I thought nothing of it. I shed my coat and started walking up the steps. Any time she had to relax was time well spent, I thought. Then I saw a trickle of water spreading across the floor from under the door. I rushed to open it, calling out to Melissa as I pounded on the lock. When I didn't get a response, I found whatever I could nearby and used it as a battering ram. 3 pushes later, I found her completely submerged in the tub. My immediate reaction was to pull her out, shut off the water, and desperately perform chest compressions. She choked and sputtered a few moments later, shaking from the pressure and looking at me with sadness and disappointment. I wrapped her in blankets and gave her something to help her rest, trying to plan what to do next. My first thought was that she needed professional help I couldn't give. I called the nearest hospitals, arranged for her to begin counseling, and told her things were going to get better. I probably said it out loud because I needed to hear it myself. I hoped I could speak it into existence. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't just improve because you will it to. The second attempt was worse. This time I found her unconscious in the tub and spent nearly 20 minutes resuscitating her. I remember crying, screaming to God in heaven that I couldn't live without her too. When she woke up, I didn't call the hospital. For some reason, I thought if I just sat down and talked to her, we could get through this. What you're doing to yourself, it isn't going to bring Ryland back, I said, offering her a warm meal. My wife gave me a hard, stony look. You think I'm trying to kill myself? How else am I supposed to interpret your recent behavior? Melissa, this has to stop, I told her, reaching for her hand. She pushed it away and stared vacantly out the window. I don't expect you to understand. It's impossible to put into words. Please, try. She looked like she was about to cry as she sat up, and I held my breath, wondering what she might say. It wasn't the answer I anticipated. I've been stuck on that beach ever since that day, reliving it over and over. My baby was gone, taken from me. But would you believe me if I told you I knew it was gone before I ever woke up? I scooted closer to the bed and asked her what she meant. When I hit the wave, everything was black at first. I felt nothing, and I was nowhere. Except I was somewhere. Not on that beach. It was empty at first, but it felt warm. Then I felt grass between my fingers. It was a field of white tulips. I could smell the flowers, Daniel. I was there, and Ryland was there too. I couldn't see him, but I could feel his presence. The voice I heard was muffled, but it was his. He was trying to tell me something, trying to give me something to hold on to. She turned to me with bloodshot eyes and sobbed. He was grasping for my hand, Daniel. We were right next to each other, and then I was snatched away, back on that beach, gasping for air. It was so perfect and fragile. I still remember that soft light, those tulips, and I knew when I saw him on the beach what had happened. He'd crossed over, and I was stuck here. We sat there in silence for a long time as I tried to fathom what she was telling me. The 2 suicide attempts suddenly made sense. You're trying to get back there. That's why you've been doing this, I realized. You think I'm crazy. I was struggling to find the right words as she pulled away from me and demanded I leave the room. Melissa, wait. I do believe you. It's just, this is a lot to process. What you're saying, it sounds impossible. I didn't believe it at first either, not until I tried last month. I blacked out in the tub. I could start to feel that light, but I didn't make it happen, she whispered. I know you want to feel him in your arms again, even just one more time, and you'd give anything to experience that, but this isn't the way, I told her. She said nothing. Her broken eyes wandered as she promised she wouldn't try again. But part of me knew she didn't mean it. Ryland and Melissa were inseparable, and now that she had survived, she would be hollow until she found some closure. So how could I help her heal? I resolved to try something different and thought I might help her in a new way by seeking a spiritual advisor. I knew that she had occasionally looked at tarot cards, So this felt like the next logical step for someone trying to connect with the spirit realm. Maybe this is how you can reconnect with Ryland, I suggested. She agreed, and we arranged for a seance the following night. The psychic arranged to meet at a small motel outside of town, even paying for the room. I took that as a sure sign she wasn't just a charlatan. She told us to bring some of Ryland's favorite items so she could get a sense of him, then ordered us to close the windows and doors. Not a drop of light or even a sound was supposed to interrupt us. Once we were immersed in darkness, we sat cross-legged on the floor. I held Melissa's hand and listened as the medium lit the candles. Tonight, we shall attempt to breach the veil and connect to Ryland. Close your eyes and listen to the universe around you. I did as I was told, wondering how soon Melissa might feel something. I had no idea how any of this was supposed to work. As the medium lit the second candle, my wife whispered, I'm not sure this is working. It takes time. We can't simply connect because we want it to be so. There must be a ritual performed. I'm going to attempt to place you into a hypnotic state. Listen to the sound of my voice, and only the sound of my voice. Melissa and I followed her instructions, but all I felt was the hard floor beneath us. I was starting to become frustrated too. Her voice. It sounds like childish laughter, the psychic said softly. Melissa scrunched up her face. No, I feel wrong. I feel cold and darkness. Let yourself go to what you're sensing. The psychic lit a third candle. There did not seem to be an electric charge in the air. Our host told Melissa to extend her hand. She began to trace the lines on her palm. There's a presence here. Wait. The psychic stopped suddenly and pulled away, just as Melissa began to sob. I was confused, but Melissa didn't want to continue. This isn't working, she stammered. Or maybe you don't want to accept what you're seeing, the psychic replied. Now I was upset. Was this stranger going to berate us? You're not going to sit here and scam us because of our grief. I need my wife to recover from this, I shouted in her face. The psychic flustered and gathered her tools, refusing to continue because of my outburst. I apologized to Melissa, but she told me it was fine. It wasn't the same as when I went under the water. Just a hoax, she muttered. We drove back to our house in silence. I started to research everything I could find about near-death experiences, hoping to understand the unnatural desire Melissa had become obsessed with. Most of the accounts were similar. People claimed they saw a bright light and heard a voice of a loved one calling to them, just like Ryland. Others described their life flashing before their eyes or feeling an out-of-body sensation. Astral projection and levitation were also mentioned, the way the subconscious mind acts during a lucid dream. But it took me several days before I found people who had been doing the same thing Melissa had, attempting to recreate their brush with death. They call themselves the Flatliners, after that movie from the 90s. It was about medical students trying to determine what lies beyond death, I recalled. The group I found online was similar in nature. They had no desire to end their lives, but their curiosity had pushed them to boldly test the boundary between life and death. To get right there on the precipice and witness what's on the other side. It's the most enthralling sensation one can ever imagine, one commenter wrote. Several claimed they had succeeded. All it takes is patience and safety, and anyone can cross the veil. We need to get professionals involved so they can study our findings. The potential knowledge we're tapping into is unlimited, another posted. According to Flatliners, there were definitely moods of doing this safely, and that stuck out to me most of all. I decided to begin corresponding with one of them who had reportedly completed 2 successful sessions. He called himself Joey. We met after work one evening. He sized me up and commented, "You're not the one who's touched the veil, are you?" "Excuse me?" I asked, as we ordered drinks. "Your aura, it's not broken or scattered. You're still grounded in this realm. So who is it I'm supposed to be guiding?" "My wife. Last spring she nearly drowned," I told him. "I see. And she was right there on the precipice, tasting nirvana," he said, fascinated, as I recounted her experience in the field of tulips. "So can you help her?" "I can make it work, but you should know what she's going through now. One taste of the nectar won't make the craving go away," he said dryly. "I'm not sure I follow." He looked at me with dark eyes. "You ever known a drug addict, Danny? You know, how they're always chasing that first high? What your wife felt on that day at the beach is just like that. She tapped into another level of existence, one most of us can't even comprehend. Don't fool yourself into thinking this will fix anything. All I can do is try to stave off the craving, lessen the damage. But you've done it twice and found a way to control the urge. Doesn't that mean it's possible to overcome?" I asked. "The difference is, I wasn't connected to anyone. No ties, no soul link. Your son is still tied to her. Ain't no overcoming that," he warned. I weighed the options and realized I still wanted to try. Anything had to be safer than the way she'd been attempting it before. That night I told Melissa everything about the flatliners. "There are risks, but you already know that," I said after explaining the session Joey had offered to set up for her. Melissa showed a spark of hope for the first time in ages when I handed her the contact information. "Daniel, I want you there with me," she said after she'd made contact. I was still uneasy about the entire process, but I promised I would stay by her side. If I was there, maybe I could keep her from being taken from me entirely. It would be like walking the edge of a razor, and I knew getting cut was almost inevitable. We met Joey at a downtown warehouse where he was waiting with a bunch of equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. There was what resembled a submersion tank, along with several computers and power stations to monitor everything correctly. "Since your experience involved drowning, we'll use this sensory deprivation chamber. You'll be submerged and monitored the entire time. If for any reason it gets too risky, there's a failsafe," Joey explained, showing off the console. "This little needle prick will save your life," he added, slipping it next to her palm. "It's one of the few objects that's proven capable of crossing back and forth between the two planes of existence. Although, to be honest, it only works if you're the one to use it over there." The way he talked made it sound like nonsense. A supernatural needle that jolts someone back to life? But Melissa didn't question it, so I kept quiet while Joey finished the prep. "So, what do you say? Ready for your life to change forever?" Melissa said yes before I could even process the question. Joey hooked her up to several heart monitors and medical leads. She stripped to her underwear and placed the electrodes on her body as Joey prepped the syringe, which was supposed to stop her heart for exactly 3 minutes. "Is that going to be enough time?" I asked as we sealed the tank. I kissed her one last time before the lid was closed. "You lost your son in only a few minutes. I think anything's possible," Joey replied. I sat beside him, watching the monitors as Melissa's heart rate slowed. It dropped lower and lower until at last it stopped completely. At the same time, my own heart was hammering in my chest. Brain activity's still good, detecting signs of REM sleep activity, possibly subconscious hallucinations. Joey muttered into a small recorder. He was treating this like a study. Maybe that was the only way he could cope with what we were doing. A minute passed, then another. I looked at the screen and frowned. "Something's wrong," I said. The readings were spiking and dropping in rapid succession. Joey jumped up and stood in front of the deprivation chamber. I know you think you have to save her, but she wants this, he told me. You saw those readings? We're losing her. Get out of the way, I shouted. When he refused, I punched him in the nose and shoved him aside. I forced the chamber open and pulled her up from the water. Melissa began to shake violently, seizing as she vomited blood and salt water. I moved to comfort her as she squeezed her palms together and screamed in my face. I was so close! It was right there! She shoved me back and scratched at my face, wailing and clawing at the ground. I pushed her gently and tried to calm her as Joey nursed his nose, still cursing. Melissa demanded that we try again. Sorry, ain't happening, doll. Not after your Prince Charming decided to clock me, he snapped. I noticed something caught between my fingers. Something Melissa had left behind when she scratched me. A petal. A single white tulip petal. I stared at it, mesmerized by its softness and the impossible implications of what it meant. The two of them were still arguing when I slipped it into my pocket, unsure whether to show it to her at all. Joey demanded we leave immediately, and later that night, I found out we had been blacklisted from their little experiments altogether. This is your fault, Melissa snarled. But I wasn't going to let her berate me after I'd saved her life again. My fault? Do you realize how hard it is watching you try to kill yourself over and over and over again? When will it be enough, Melissa? What if this is too much for me? What if I can't take it anymore? You don't understand, she whispered. You're right, I don't. Ryland is gone and I'm still here. You don't believe that. I can hear it in your voice. You want this to be real as much as I do, she insisted. I just want you to be happy. I tried to hold myself together and excused myself to the bathroom. There, I took the white petal out of my pocket and stared at it again. Such a simple thing, so small, but it shook me to my core. Could it really be possible? I recalled the way Melissa had described the afterlife, a field of tulips, a soft light, Ryland's voice. She had reached over and brought something back. Part of me wanted it to be true, and that part of me started to grow. She stopped talking about it after that, but the thought of what was waiting beyond the veil was always fresh in my mind. I needed to know more. Eventually, the anniversary drew near. I found myself researching again. Sometime during that period, I even reached out to the psychic, hoping she might help me make sense of the petal. Her response wasn't what I expected. She called a few times and left strange voicemails, each one more frantic than the last. All of them sounded frightened, like she wanted nothing more to do with this. Listen, I've been thinking about the two of you lately. Ever since... Look, yeah, I am a con artist, but what we experienced together that night was real. More real than anything I've ever felt. I think there was a presence with us, just not what we expected. She rambled on after that, but I stopped listening. I deleted the message and went back to reading posts on a flatliner message board. One article suggested that in order to truly obtain transcendence, you needed more than just the right death. You needed the right location. We should do something special. For his memory, I told Melissa one day after work. She had just finished an online project and told me she wasn't sure she could handle something like that. I want to go back to the beach, where everything changed forever, I said. I think she wanted to say no. I thought of what Joey had warned me about. What I was offering her was the equivalent of a shot of cocaine to an addict. It would be right there in front of her, impossible to ignore. Still, we drove down early in the morning, and when it was just the two of us. She stepped onto the beach, the ocean breeze, and sank her toes into the sand, letting out a long sigh as the waves crashed gently against the shore. I'd brought some of Ryland's favorite things to make a small memorial for him. According to the online community, creating a memorial could increase spiritual connection. Melissa stood watching the water, a single thought in her head. "I want to take one ride on the waves," she told me. I couldn't think of a reason to say no, even though there had to be dozens. "Please, Daniel, I need to do this. For Ryland," she insisted. I don't know why I agreed. Something was compelling both of us to find the answer. All of this had been leading to something, a revelation. I could feel it. She pulled out her board and stood near the shore without saying a word. Then she paddled out, heading into the surf. I watched, just like I had a year before. I even took my phone out to record it. Everything was lining up with how it happened that day. I kept scanning the water, searching for something, some sign that this was real. I thought I saw a second silhouette there just for a moment. Then Melissa's body jerked forward. She pushed herself into a wave and vanished beneath the water. I held my breath. The board surfaced first, floating gently in the shallows. The seconds crawled. She was under for 8 minutes, and then she returned. The moment she surfaced, I knew she'd seen something. I saw it in her face. She was different. Her eyes were filled with hope. Tell me what you saw," I said as she gasped for breath and spat out seawater. "You sent something back," she whispered, holding out her hand. A handful of petals. "What did he say?" I asked, trembling. "I think he was trying to tell me there's a way for both of us to communicate with him." "Both of us? But how?" "I'm not sure. But do you realize what this means, Daniel? We can reconnect with our son," she cried through her tears. Just like that, we weren't on opposite sides anymore. We were in this together. Over the next few months, we shared everything: ideas, theories, rituals. We studied near-death experiences. We mapped out every element of Melissa's visions. There were methods out there, Melissa said, that people in the flatliner community claimed could extend the experience. Dangerous methods. The kind most didn't come back from. It's called the crossover list. Meaning, they never returned, she explained, showing me a thread. There had to be hundreds of names. She was convinced that if we were going to succeed, we'd have to try one of the advanced methods. There was a drug on the streets the flatliners called N. It was designed to stop your heart for nearly 30 minutes. If we could do that and place our bodies in the water, just think of what we might accomplish, she told me. We had a plan. Everything was building toward a single goal, and nothing was going to get in our way. I managed to convince Jiry to help us again, just so there would be someone to pull us back from the brink. He gave us that special needle, too. For good luck, he claimed. And so it was time to begin. We had the beach to ourselves again, paddling out from the shore side by side. The waves were rougher that day, crashing with strange urgency. Melissa gave me a brave smile and nodded. Then she plunged the syringe into her chest. I did the same. We laced our fingers together as the surf pulled us into its cold embrace. It felt like lightning striking my body. The water closed over my head, and I was gasping for breath. My instincts screamed at me to fight, but I was numb, paralyzed. Then the numbness gave way to weightlessness, and I began to sink. My limbs disappeared, my vision blurred, light faded. I could see my own face, and then I was gone. I felt myself pulled into the depths, but the ocean wasn't there anymore. The world dissolved and reappeared into something else, something warmer. I opened my eyes and found myself standing in a field. It stretched out endlessly, waves of white tulips swaying in a gentle breeze. The scent was sweet and crisp. The light was soft and golden. I stood in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the serenity. And something touched my hand. I turned and Melissa was standing beside me. She took my hand. Together we walked into the field. It felt like hours. Neither of us spoke. At last we saw him. Ryland stood in the middle of the grove, his back to us. "Ryland!" Melissa cried, squealing with joy. He turned and smiled at us, that same perfect smile we hadn't seen in almost 2 years. I wanted to cry. I could hear his voice in my mind, calm, warm, loving. He stretched out his hand to us. We took a few steps forward, tears streaming down our faces. Our son touched our hands, smiling with the same love and adoration he had always shown us. It was like he was telling us he was glad we were there, that he never wanted us to leave. He squeezed our hands gently and gestured for us to come closer. "Oh, my beautiful baby boy. God, you're so perfect," Melissa whispered, falling to her knees and kissing his face. She stroked his cheek. "Look, Daniel, even his scar is gone." I leaned in. She was right. The small scar under his eye, the one he'd gotten when he was 5, had vanished. Perfect. Too perfect. Melissa touched his palm, growing suddenly quiet. His eyes looked at me again, asking me to hold him. I reached out. Melissa grabbed my wrist. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice cracking. "This isn't our Ryland." I froze. The tulips around her feet began to close in, snaking up her legs. I stood up and stepped back. A blinding light exploded across the grove. Vines erupted from the ground and wrapped around our limbs, yanking us down toward Ryland. "Daniel, we have to fight it," Melissa screamed. I looked at him, or what he had become. His perfect blue eyes widened unnaturally, and his mouth began to split. His body twisted backward, and bones cracked as tendrils burst from his spine. His chest caved in, separating into 4 gaping mouths filled with teeth. They shrieked and hissed. The ground around us split open, a chasm of flesh and bone swallowing the field. Ryland's neck elongated and gushed a thick, black ooze. It struck Melissa and me, pinning us down as the monster's jaws loomed. Before us, I saw bodies, thousands of them, writhing, screaming, trapped in the pit. 1,000,000 souls caught in eternal torment. "Daniel!" Melissa screamed, clawing at the earth. The ooze reached my face. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't see. But I remembered the failsafe. I clutched my wife, wrapped my arms around her, and drove the needle between us. The last thing I saw was Ryland's face collapsing into a worm-like mass, its eyes like pits, its mouth unhinging as it tried to swallow us whole. Closing my eyes, I felt a jolt surge through my chest. It was like I rocketed up from the depths of hell itself. I coughed violently, choking on salt water as the wind returned to my lungs. I gasped and clawed at the sand, crawling to my knees. When I looked up, Joey was standing there, surprised I'd come back. I turned to search the water. Melissa surfaced not far away, still screaming, still disoriented. She clung to me, sobbing uncontrollably, trying to make sense of the nightmare we had just endured. The warning the psychic had tried to give us, it all made sense now. A presence had been there on the other side, just not the one we expected. I played back her voicemails, I listened to every word, and I shuddered. It's calling to you now, like the ancient mythical siren did to sailors. It sings a song so sweet you simply can't resist. Your wife heard it first on that beach, when she pulled you under. Now it's set the bait. Those petals you found, that's what will lure you in. We had never seen Ryland. Not really. The visions we shared, the tulips, the warmth, his perfect face. were not a gift from our sun. They were illusions, a trap, the siren's web. The love of a parent had been twisted into a lure. The field had been the maw of something ancient and angry, a cosmic spider, and we had fallen straight into its mouth. As I sit here now, staring at the calendar, thinking about our future, about Ryland, I realize the most harrowing and awful truth. We have become addicted to its song. I can close my eyes and still hear my boy's voice, calling to me from beyond the veil, whispering sweet nothings that tangle around my soul. It knows how to find us now. How long, I wonder, will we be able to resist before it overwhelms every part of our lives? How long before we dip back into its unnatural maw again? I know it's still there, just past the edge of perception, reaching into my mind with its tendrils and pulling. And yet, I know eventually there will be no fighting it. There'll be no coming back. We've passed the point of no return. Now, we sink together. That was Beyond the Walls of Death by Kyle Harrison, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
You know, the longer you stare through the cracks in the world, the more you realize you're not the only one staring.
And sometimes what's on the other side isn't a reunion, it's a reminder. Coming up next, a craftsman finds out that his work doesn't sleep, and neither will he.
Cal thought he was just a puppet maker, but when the marionettes start moving without strings and reflections of himself appear where they shouldn't, he realizes the real show isn't for an audience, it's for him. This is the Marionette Hour by T. Marshall Keane, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood. Part 1. Cal never remembered falling asleep anymore. Mornings came without warning, abrupt and indifferent, as if someone had flipped a switch in the middle of a dream he couldn't recall. He'd surface slowly to the sputtering rattle of the window fan grinding in its rusted frame, or the chill of air curling through the gaps in the siding, dragging him up from a depth he didn't choose to leave. That morning began like the others, except something felt off. The air carried the usual scent of sawdust, but beneath it lingered a sharper odor, something acrid and faintly metallic. Varnish, maybe, or oil that had warmed too long in the sun. He stared at the ceiling, letting the ache in his knees settle before sitting up. When he reached for his glasses, his hand swept a half-empty pill bottle off the nightstand. It clattered to the floor, spinning briefly before toppling over. He slipped the glasses on with a sigh. The world came back into focus, and with it, a quiet nausea rose in his gut. They had moved again. 6 puppets stood arranged in a semicircle near the workshop sink, their limbs contorted into unnatural poses. They lacked strings, yet each figure had been frozen mid-gesture as though someone had interrupted a performance and left the cast suspended in silence. One had its jaw extended unnaturally, the head twisted until its chin nearly pointed backward. Another knelt with its legs folded awkwardly, one arm lifted toward the ceiling as if seeking revelation in a room without answers. Cal stiffened. He hadn't touched them since Wednesday. He was sure of it. He rose carefully, stepping over the marionette that blocked his doorway. It was one of his older models, carved from cypress and dressed in a worn conductor's cap. Its hands had been repositioned, palms up, resting beside its torso, as though it had been offering something or asking for mercy. He lifted it and set it gently on the hallway bench, brushing off none of the dust clinging to its back. His slippers made no sound as he shuffled to the kitchenette, each motion governed more by muscle memory than purpose. Kettle on, mug retrieved, instant coffee, 1 spoon of sugar, 2 because the day already felt wrong. By the time he returned to the studio with the chipped mug, he couldn't avoid looking at them. The puppets. They looked even more lifeless than usual when arranged this way, like mute spectators daring him to remember whether he had placed them there himself. He'd grown used to small lapses, keys in the freezer, lights left on. Age had been whittling away at his short-term memory for years. Still, this felt different. This felt orchestrated. He turned his back on them and fixed his gaze on the shelf of tools above the bench. He needed something repetitive, something familiar, something to occupy his hands and pull his focus away from the quiet nausea growing beneath his ribs. That was when the doorbell rang. The sound jolted him. His grip on the mug tightened, nearly slipping. Visitors had become rare, and the bell hadn't worked properly in months. It buzzed when pressed, a choking stutter instead of a chime. He walked slowly to the front door and peered through the peephole. Janine. Of course. He unlatched the locks and opened the door halfway. "You picked a hell of a time." Janine raised a brow. "I texted you yesterday, twice. Still using that brick of a phone?" "I charged it last week." "That explains it." She brushed past him into the house, carrying a grocery bag in one hand. "You look like hell, by the way." Cal closed the door and relocked it, more out of habit than anything else. "Nice to see you, too." She didn't answer right away. She set the bag on the counter, pulled out 2 cans of soup, a loaf of bread, and a 6-pack of something organic that promised better sleep. "You eating anything that doesn't require a tetanus shot?" He scratched at the stubble on his chin. "Define expired." She gave him a look. "You smell like turpentine in midlife crisis." "I've been working." "That's what you call it." She nodded toward the studio. "I saw the freak show on my way in." Cal's jaw tensed. "They weren't like that when I went to bed." "Oh, great. Haunted puppets now." "I'm serious." She crossed her arms. "Cal, you need sleep. The kind where you don't wake up wondering who arranged your dolls for a seance." He ran a hand through his graying hair and sighed. "I don't think it's just that." Janine's expression shifted. She studied him more closely, her eyes narrowing. "You haven't had another one of those fugue episodes, have you?" "No." "Because you're not exactly convincing me otherwise." "I've been locking the doors, avoiding the studio at night. I even left myself a note." "And?" The note was gone the next morning, replaced with a sketch. Janine hesitated. "A sketch of what?" He crossed the room and opened a drawer near the window. Inside sat a yellowed napkin, torn at one corner. He handed it to her without a word. She unfolded it and recoiled slightly. "Jesus!" The drawing looked like something scrawled by a child with a heavy hand. One of his puppets knelt beside a sleeping man. Dangling from the puppet's wooden fingers was a smaller marionette, its strings held above the man's chest. "I didn't draw that," Cal said quietly. Janine folded the napkin again, tighter this time. "You need help." "I need answers." "From what? A bunch of haunted plywood?" He didn't respond. The silence stretched until Janine broke it with a sigh. "Look, maybe it's stress, or maybe your meds are messing with your sleep, but I don't like where this is going." "I set up a camera last night," he said. "What kind?" "Old camcorder, motion activated. It's still recording." "You haven't checked it?" "Not yet. I don't know if I want to." "You're afraid of your own footage." "I'm afraid it'll make sense." She stepped back, placing her hands on her hips. "Okay, I've got a shift in an hour, but tomorrow I'm coming back. We'll watch it together. Sound good?" Cal nodded. And until then, don't go carving yourself any new friends, all right?" He managed a faint smile. "No promises." She kissed his forehead before heading for the door and then paused. "One more thing." "What?" "That big one in the glass case. I thought you got rid of him." Cal stiffened. "I didn't." "Well, he's not in the case anymore." He turned to the studio. The display that once held Mr. Wiggles now stood open, the glass door hanging slightly ajar. "I never opened it," he said. Janine met his eyes, her voice lower now. "Then you'd better hope you're sleepwalking, because if you're not—" She didn't finish the sentence. The door closed behind her. Cal stood staring at the empty case, unmoving. Part 2. The camera hadn't moved. Cal had checked it twice already, but each time he returned to the studio, it remained exactly where he had left it, mounted on a rusted tripod in the far corner, aimed toward the workbench and the rows of puppets lined up beneath the shelves. The LED light blinked steadily. The tape was full. He hesitated, then reached forward and pressed rewind. The camcorder whirred, its internal gears rasping faintly in the stillness. He sat down in the nearest chair, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound the house made in its silence. The faint wheeze of the floorboards beneath him, the mechanical hum of the fridge beyond the doorway, the whisper of tree branches brushing against the boarded-up window. When the tape reached its beginning, he pressed play. At first, only static filled the screen, followed by a grayscale image of the studio bathed in the harsh contrast of the infrared lens. The cluttered shelves and workbench glowed in pale shades of white, while deeper shadows pooled in the corners. At 10:03 p.m., he watched himself shuffle into frame, switch off the lights, and retreat toward the bedroom. The room remained perfectly still for hours afterward, motionless and untouched. Until 2:37 a.m. The timestamp changed. Something moved. At first, it appeared as a flicker near the edge of the frame, just a shadow. But then the figure became clearer. It was him, or something wearing his face. Cal watched, unmoving, as the doppelganger stepped into the frame with a stiff, unnatural gait. Its bare feet dragged slightly on the hardwood. Its head hung at an awkward tilt, jaw loose, arms limp at its sides. When it reached the center of the room, it raised both arms slowly, as if conducting a silent performance. One by one, the puppets responded. They didn't snap upright or spring into motion. Instead, they were guided, lifted by something unseen. Their limbs pulled gently into place. One puppet was dragged across the floor and posed on the bench in a cruciform sprawl. Another was placed in the rafters by the window, suspended by its own cords and left to spin slowly. Throughout it all, the version of Cal on the screen remained silent, his eyes glassy and unfocused, his body swaying in rhythm with some invisible current. The timestamp flickered again. 3:12 a.m. Now all the puppets had been positioned. Their stances were expressive but nonsensical, frozen mid-action in some surreal, unknowable drama. Without warning, the figure turned to face the camera. It smiled. The screen erupted in static. Cal lunged forward, paused the tape, and then rewound. He scrubbed backward frame by frame until the moment the intruder entered the studio. Every movement repeated itself in grim silence. The thing drifted across the floor, gently animating the puppets as though born to the role. The footage offered no explanations, only deeper confusion. The longer he stared, the more distant he felt from the man on the screen. He stopped the tape and pushed himself up from the chair. His hands trembled. He crossed the hallway in 3 unstable strides and threw open the bedroom door. His sheets were undisturbed. The pillows sat exactly where he had left them. On the dresser opposite the bed, the second camcorder still blinked red, its light steady. He approached, rewound the tape, and pressed play. This footage showed him sleeping all night. His body remained still, nestled beneath the covers, unbothered and unmoving. He watched himself lie there with mouth slack and chest rising in slow, rhythmic intervals. The timestamp matched the hours from the first tape. There had been no sleepwalking, no midnight excursions. He watched the footage again, then a third time. He searched the shadows for movement, any subtle twitch of a limb or flicker of light that might suggest he had left the bed, but there was nothing. And yet, on the other tape, a chill ran along his arms. He reached for the thermostat and saw it still read 68 degrees, though the air had turned sharply cold. A draft curled under the door frame. Then he saw the blood. A thin, dried trail marked the inside of his forearm, starting just below the elbow and descending in narrow lines toward his wrist. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing 3 shallow scratches etched into the skin. Each was curved and evenly spaced, as though carved by something small but precise. He felt no pain. He stumbled into the kitchen, disoriented. The microwave clock read 9:02 a.m. He returned to the studio and pressed play on the first camcorder, but the footage had changed. Instead of static, the screen now displayed a frozen image, his own face, pressed close to the lens. His eyes stared half-lidded and dull, the expression vacant. He pressed the eject button. Nothing happened. He powered the camcorder off. The screen remained lit. He pulled the plug from the wall. Still, the image remained. He took a step back, watching in disbelief as the image began to recede. It zoomed out, not with any mechanical function he recognized, but as if something behind the screen were pulling away from him. The room came back into view. Only the puppets were no longer in their previous positions. Each one had turned. They were facing him. With a gasp, he swatted the camcorder off the table. It crashed to the floor and shattered, shards of plastic skittering across the wood. Yet the room remained silent. No sparks, no smoke, only the crackle of broken plastic in the silence. Then he heard something shift above him. He looked up. Mr. Wiggles perched on the crossbeam overhead. Cal hadn't placed him there. He knew that much. The puppet's limbs hung loosely, bent at unnatural angles that suggested flexibility far beyond what Cal had built. Its porcelain face, cracked along the left side, gazed down at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The button pupils seemed aligned with uncanny precision, as though sight were a possibility. There were no strings. Still, it held its place. Cal backed away, stopping just short of the hallway. The bedroom door had opened. He had closed it earlier, he was certain. Faint static drifted from within. He nudged the door with his foot. It creaked inward, revealing an emptied space. Both camcorders were gone. The tripod had fallen sideways. Drawers were pulled open. The bedspread had been twisted into a grotesque shape resembling a marionette. Its limbs formed from pillows, its face crudely stitched with black thread into a mocking caricature. A square of white paper jutted from the flannel shirt draped over its chest. He pulled it free. Another drawing. The lines were childlike again, drawn with heavy pressure. This one depicted a man suspended by strings, held aloft by 4 puppets. Each bore Cal's face. Above them, in the corner of the page, a 5th figure loomed, featureless and tall, with no eyes and only hands. He dropped the paper and fled the room. The kitchen light flickered when he entered. He flipped the switch off and then back on. The fridge gave a weak hum before falling silent again. He checked the clock. Still 9:02 a.m. He stopped in place. Something in his chest tightened. Not pain, but a kind of internal bracing, like his body understood something before his mind could process it. He unlocked the front door and opened it, desperate for daylight. But the world outside had turned to night. There were no street lamps, no porch lights from the neighbors, not even the sound of crickets or wind. Only a thick, unnatural darkness stretching in every direction. He slammed the door shut and turned to face the hallway. A figure stood at the far end. It was him, or something wearing him. Its posture mirrored his own, but the expression was wrong. The head tilted slightly to one side, as if examining him with detached amusement. The mouth stretched into a grin that felt practiced. The lights dimmed, and the hallway vanished into shadow. Part 3. Janine returned 2 days later. At least, she believed it had been 2 days. Her phone confirmed the date, but the moment she stepped inside Cal's house, time no longer felt trustworthy. A film of dust coated every surface. The air inside had grown uncomfortably warm, too much for early October, as if someone had cranked the heat and forgotten to adjust it. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet, not from age alone, but with a kind of protest, as though reluctant to bear weight again. She called his name once from the kitchen, then again as she moved down the hallway, but got no response. The studio door stood ajar. That was new. She pushed it open and stopped. The puppets had been rearranged. They now stood unaided, balanced in positions that defied gravity and intention. One sat on the bench with its legs dangling, head tilted slightly downward. Another stood poised on tiptoe near the closet door, its face turned as though eavesdropping. In the center of the room, occupying the brightest circle of light from the overhead lamp, sat Mr. Wiggles. Janine stared. The puppet wore its usual dusty red vest and frayed bow tie. Its cracked porcelain face reflected just enough light to exaggerate its expression, which was neither smiling nor neutral, but something else, an intent that was not its own. Though the arms hung limply at its sides, the posture seemed deliberate, as though it had been waiting. "Cal?" she called again. From the bedroom came a rasp, rough and low. "Back here." She followed the sound and found him on the floor. His eyes were red and bleary, his cheeks smeared with ink. He hadn't shaved. His hands trembled as she helped him sit upright. "You've been sleeping on the floor?" "I don't sleep," he replied. Janine frowned and looked him over more carefully. "You're bleeding again." He followed her gaze and lifted his left hand. Thin cuts marked the back of it, shallow parallel lines that looked as though they'd been made by twine or wire. "I didn't do it," he said. "I haven't even entered the studio. I've been locking the door, hiding the keys." "They're unlocked now?" Cal nodded, but not in agreement. It was more like a gesture of resignation. "They unlock themselves." Janine narrowed her eyes. That's not how locks work. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she noticed something had changed in his expression. It wasn't exhaustion, though that lingered in his posture. It wasn't fear either. What she saw was something hollowed out, a recognition of something beyond his control. "I need to show you the tape," he said. They returned to the studio. He loaded the footage with fingers that barely responded to his commands. The camcorder still functioned, despite the visible damage to its casing. One side had cracked, and several buttons were unresponsive, but it still recognized power. A tangled mess of flash drives covered the workbench. He sorted through them until he found the most recent. Janine watched in silence, as he inserted it into a USB hub. The file opened on the laptop. The video began with the same static grayscale framing. The studio at night, pale in infrared. The furniture appeared spectral beneath the lens, and nothing moved for several minutes. Then the shadows thickened, darkness gathering in the corners until it took shape, and one at a time, the puppets began to lift. There were no strings. They rose like bodies in water, as though buoyed by something unseen. Mr. Wiggles moved first, his arms raised slowly in a gesture that resembled invocation. The others followed, a dozen in total. They turned in unison, all facing the closed door to Cal's bedroom. Then he entered the frame. Janine leaned forward. "Is that you?" Cal remained silent. The figure resembled him. It wore his clothes and moved like someone mimicking a familiar rhythm, but its proportions were subtly wrong. The neck appeared too long, the limbs too rigid, and the face, though nearly identical, held no spark of recognition. Its expression was flat, like a mask that had forgotten how to animate emotion. The figure raised both arms. The puppets danced. There was no grace in their movement. Their limbs jerked and twisted in sharp, erratic motions, snapping into place like broken clockwork. One puppet's leg rotated unnaturally, bending backward at the knee until the joint cracked with visible stress. Janine flinched. The figure paused, its head rotated toward the camera. It smiled. The smile matched Cal's in shape, but not in meaning. The eyes were different. Then the screen went black. Janine pressed her palms together, trying to still the tremor in her fingers. "That wasn't a loop." "No," Cal said. "That wasn't a dream, or sleepwalking, or some kind of episode." "I told you." She turned to him. "How many of these have you watched?" "All of them," he said quietly. "They're never the same. Every time I play one, something changes. The puppets are arranged differently. Sometimes a few are missing. Sometimes I'm not the one in the video." Her voice dropped. "What are you saying?" "I think the tapes are lying." Janine stared at him. "Lying how?" He stood and walked slowly to the closet. Beneath the pile of cloth and broken marionette parts, he pulled out a thick sketch pad and returned to the desk. Every page was filled. He opened it and flipped through the drawings. Each one depicted a different layout of the studio. In some, the puppets gathered around a single chair. In others, they climbed the walls or hung upside down from the rafters. One showed Cal himself suspended from the ceiling by the same strings he had used on them. "I started sketching what I saw after each tape," he explained, "trying to keep track of what was real and what changed. I thought if I documented it, I could prove something or at least see a pattern." Janine turned to the final page. It was mostly blank. Only one line had been written near the center, in tight, angular script. "The show must go on." She stepped back from the desk. "You think you're being made to perform?" "I know I am." "And these changes, what are they? Rewrites?" He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Call it direction." She glanced toward the camcorder. Its recording light blinked red. "You need to leave this house," she said. "Stay with me for a few days. I can call one of my colleagues, someone who specializes in parasomnias and disassociation. Maybe it's something neurological. We can rule that out before—" "I can't leave," he said flatly. "It follows me." Her expression darkened. "What does that mean?" "I went out last week just to get sleep aids. I thought if I broke the pattern, it might stop. But when I came back, the puppets had moved again. That night, I checked the front-facing camera on my phone. And I was in the back seat. Janine froze. That isn't possible. Nothing about this is. He moved toward the far corner of the room, where Mr. Wiggles still sat beneath the lamp. The puppet remained motionless, its cracked face catching just enough light to reflect a distorted smile. Last night, Cal said, I dreamed I was him. Janine took a step closer. What do you mean? I was inside his body, not like a costume, like I was watching from behind his eyes. I couldn't move, but I felt him moving me, like he was the puppeteer and I was the puppet. He turned toward her. His voice had dropped to a whisper, hoarse and dry. And I could hear myself screaming. She reached for his arm. Cal, please, you're not safe here. Come with me, just for a night or two. We'll figure this out, together. He hesitated, then nodded once. All right. Janine exhaled. Relief passed over her face. But before I go, he added, I want to watch one more tape. Part 4. Cal insisted on watching the final tape alone. Janine argued at first. She offered to sit beside him, to keep him grounded in something real, but he refused. He explained, not unkindly, that whatever was happening had already warped the edges of reality. If someone else remained in the room while he watched, he feared the truth might be diluted, reshaped to accommodate the presence of a witness. He needed to see it clearly, even if it meant seeing something he couldn't unsee. He waited until the house fell quiet again, until Janine had packed a small bag for him and stepped outside to take a call. Then he returned to the studio, loaded the tape, and pressed play. The screen remained black for several seconds. There was no timestamp, no static, no grainy flicker to suggest the camera had begun recording. Eventually, a faint glow illuminated the frame, a single overhead bulb swaying gently on its cord. The studio came into view in fragments, edges emerging from the dark as though remembered rather than recorded. Then, the music began. It crackled faintly, distorted like a phonograph submerged in water. The melody moved in a key that didn't belong to any scale Cal recognized. It resembled a lullaby, but its cadence refused resolution. Each note strained against the next, evoking not peace, but unease. The camera began to pan, not with the halting motion of a faulty tripod or the twitch of mechanical tracking, but with eerie precision, sweeping across the room as if guided by an invisible hand. It turned toward the far wall, where the puppets had assembled themselves in a rigid line. There were 12. They stood with their strings hanging limp, heads slightly bowed, arms at their sides. Mr. Wiggles stood at the center, his frame taller now. Cal noticed the puppet's limbs had changed. The arms appeared longer than he had carved them, the wrists too narrow, the legs stretched unnaturally. The cracks in the porcelain face had deepened, and something faintly metallic shimmered inside one of them, pulsing in time with the warped lullaby. The puppets began to move. At first, only a twitch, then a fluid, coordinated motion spread through the group. Their arms rose in near-perfect unison. Their heads lifted. Each puppet executed a series of gestures, kneeling, turning, lifting their hands toward the ceiling, as though performing a ritual long rehearsed and never fully understood. The camera pulled back. A chair now stood in the middle of the room. Cal was already in it. His wrists had been bound with marionette wire. His ankles were secured to the chair's legs. A crude rig forced his mouth open, mimicking the jaw mechanism he used in his older designs. He didn't move. He didn't resist. His body sat slumped beneath the light, as still as the puppets had once been. The Cal watching from the other side of the screen hardly breathed. Mr. Wiggles stepped forward. The puppet's movements were calculated. It raised one hand and the others followed. Together, the puppets encircled the chair and reached toward the man bound within it. Then, everything stopped. The music ended mid-note, cut off as if someone had pinched the sound from the air. The bulb above the chair flickered once. A second passed, then it burst. The screen went black. Cal blinked and found himself sitting on the edge of his bed. He had no memory of leaving the studio. The room around him was undisturbed. The camcorder was gone. The flash drive too. Only the monitor remained, flickering with the last frozen frame of the footage. His own face, captured just before the bulb had shattered. The image was warped by lens distortion, his mouth forced wide, his eyes glassy and unblinking, reflecting a terror he hadn't felt until just now. He stood slowly and turned toward the hallway. The puppets had gathered. They lined the corridor facing inward like mourners at a wake. Their heads were lowered, their hands hung at their sides. The overhead lights flickered, and each time the brightness dimmed, he felt their positions had shifted, only slightly, just enough to alter the shape of their shadows. He pushed open the studio door. The chair stood empty, but in its place, someone else was waiting. A full-sized puppet now occupied the center of the room. It wore one of Cal's flannel shirts, the same paint-stained one he'd worn the day before. The face, though clearly carved from wood, had been modeled after his own features with unsettling precision. The eyes were painted, yet they appeared deeper than they should have been, layered, as if something could look back out through them. He took a step forward, almost against his will. The puppet raised a hand. Cal stopped. It moved toward him, not with mechanical stiffness, but with a disturbing grace. Each step was purposeful, the limbs bent exactly as they should have. When it reached him, it extended its hand again, this time offering something. A match. Cal accepted it. He looked around the room, only now registering the heavy scent in the air. Varnish. Lamp oil. A bottle lay overturned near the workbench, its contents already soaked into the floorboards. The puppet stepped back and waited. Cal struck the match. The flame bloomed in his hand, flickering softly. He hesitated. The puppet did not. It reached toward the fire, pressing its fingers against the flame. The match flared brightly, then dropped to the floor. The oil ignited instantly. Flames surged outward, crawling along the grain of the wood and up the curtains. The desk caught quickly, so did the racks of cloth and the crates of finished parts. The heat grew with each breath he took, filling the studio with shifting shadows and orange light. He backed away from the blaze, but the hallway was no longer clear. The puppets had closed ranks. They stood shoulder to shoulder now, blocking the exit. Their heads remained bowed, their presence unwavering. Cal turned back toward the studio. The chair had returned. The puppet now sat in it. He could see the paint melting across its face, the cracks widening in the porcelain veneer. One eye had already begun to run, black lines dripping like ink across the carved cheek. Still, it smiled. He opened his mouth and screamed. Janine returned the next morning. She knocked twice before trying the handle. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air carried the scent of char and melted plastic, but no smoke lingered. Nothing had burned. The walls were clean. The curtains were intact. There were no signs of fire at all. She opened the studio door. The puppets sat quietly along the walls, each one carefully placed. Nothing moved. A small card rested on the workbench beside a box of matches and a cracked porcelain button. Janine picked it up. The card read, "Thank you for attending tonight's performance. The Marionette hour will return when called." She turned slowly toward the chair in the center of the room. A new puppet had taken its place there. It wore a flannel shirt. Its face was carved in perfect likeness. Only the smile was different, too wide, too knowing. Mr. Wiggles sat beside it, his porcelain head resting gently on the puppet's shoulder. Janine stepped back and closed the door behind her. She did not return, but the lights never turned off again. That was The Marionette Hour by T. Marshall Keane, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood.
If your own face starts showing up where you didn't leave it, it's already too late to run.
And sometimes the scariest puppet master is the one behind your own eyes.
Speaking of rooms you can't leave, our next tale brings us to a meeting room no one's supposed to use, and some doors that once opened don't like to close. A new hire learns the hard way why one office door stays locked and why certain secrets never make it to the employee handbook. This is Conference Room D by Mark Lynch, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Starting a new job can always be stressful. You know the score when you're coming into a new role in a new company and must figure out the office politics, remember all the names and faces, learn new skills, and prove yourself to the boss. It's a challenge, especially when you enter a toxic workplace. I've had a few bad jobs in my time, but office work is rarely a matter of life and death, and nothing can compare to the nightmare I experienced during my brief stint at Delio Incorporated. What can I say about that particular company? On the surface, it's an ordinary and rather mundane business that manufactures household and industrial use cleaning products. The role I accepted was for quality control manager in their headquarters, a nondescript and unremarkable office located in the central business district. It had been 3 months since I was laid off from my last gig. Bills were piling up, my credit cards were maxed out, and my rent was overdue. Therefore, I was happy to receive the job offer. That's not to say I didn't do my due diligence on the company, making inquiries online and through recruiters. I have to admit, there were some red flags raised. People I spoke with didn't recommend Delio Incorporated as a good place to work. There was nothing specific I could get information on, no lawsuits or harassment allegations. However, there were dark rumors about the company and, specifically, the head office where I'd be based. Again, there was nothing concrete, only talk of a bad vibe about the place, along with a high staff turnover rate. Honestly, I did have some reservations, but frankly, I was also desperate, so I decided to take the job and make the best of it. And this, of course, turned out to be a mistake, but hindsight's 20/20. Still, my first couple of weeks in post went surprisingly well. My colleagues were decent folk for the most part. Mr. Hill was the CEO and my direct line manager. He wasn't the worst boss I've had, not by a long shot. I didn't work there long enough to know him well, but Mr. Hill struck me as a fair man, a tough taskmaster with a no-nonsense approach, but a boss who treated his employees with respect. I can't help but feel sympathy for Hill, especially given the dark secrets he's carried on his shoulders for so many years. Jean, a middle-aged mother of two, was the office manager. She was competent and efficient, but prone to being overdramatic. And then there was Rachel, the perky and attractive receptionist with long dark hair, sparkling brown eyes, and sultry good looks. She was flirty and fun, and I'll admit to developing a crush on her. The final character in my sad little story was Carl. Cocky sales rep with the kind of good looks and arrogant confidence you'd expect from someone in his line of work. I liked Carl for the most part, but saw him as a potential rival for Rachel's affections. I think I got the lay of the land pretty quickly, but it became clear there was a dark shadow hanging over that office, and this was all down to Conference Room D. As its name suggests, Conference Room D was one of 4 conference rooms located in the head office. Conference Room D was indeed unique because it was located in an annex that otherwise seemed abandoned. None of the office staff had desks in the annex, and the lights and radiators were always switched off. This struck me as odd, but honestly, I didn't give the matter much thought, as I reckoned they just used the annex for storage or something. This was until I tried to book Room D and received a sharp rebuke from the powers that be. I wanted to arrange a meeting with the department heads so I could hash out a strategy going forward. There was only one time that suited all attendees. Unfortunately, rooms A through C were all booked out for client meetings. Naturally, I thought I could use Room D, which was just sitting there empty. So I tried to make a booking through the portal, only to find that Conference Room D was blocked out indefinitely. Now, this was a mild annoyance, but I wanted to keep the meeting time, and so the next port of call was Jean, the office manager. I went to her room on Wednesday morning, not realizing the storm I was about to cause. Jean was sitting in her office, the look of concentration on her makeup-covered face as she frowned under the beehive haircut. Pictures of her family were carefully laid out on the desk, and Jean smiled amicably and invited me inside when I knocked on her door. "Come in, Daniel. Please take a seat," she said, continuing to smile as she addressed me by my first name. "Now then," Jean continued after I was seating. "How are you getting on, Daniel? Is everyone treating you okay?" "Yes," I replied with a nod. "I'm finding my feet, and everyone's been very welcoming." "Oh, good." Jean replied with her grin widened. "That's what I like to hear. We consider ourselves one big happy family here at Delio, and I know Mr. Hill really wants you to feel like part of the team. Now, what is it I can do for you today?" "Well, Jean, it's about the meeting I'm trying to set up. I'm having trouble organizing a venue. I was planning to use Conference Room D, but noticed it's block booked. So I was hoping you could work your magic and get it opened up for me." Up until that point, we'd been having a pleasant conversation, but the atmosphere inside the room changed in an instant following my request. The smile suddenly disappeared from Jean's face, her expression changing to what I can only describe as a mixture of disgust and fear. Her voice became stern and agitated as she spluttered out her uncompromising reply. No, absolutely not. Room D is not available for booking at any time. This is simply out of the question." I was taken aback by Jean's heavy-handed response, but I thought I could talk her around and save the situation. I'm sorry, Jean, I didn't mean to rock the boat. If Room D is used for storage, I don't mind moving a few boxes and tidying up the place. Unfortunately, my attempt to calm the office manager backfired, as Jean stood up from her desk, pointing a finger at my face and shouting with unnecessary aggression, "No, Daniel, this is not going to happen. You must leave my office immediately." I got up from my chair, raising my hand defensively, and backing out of the room without saying another word as Jean continued to glare at me from behind her desk. Needless to say, I was rather shaken by the encounter with Delio's office manager. But this wasn't the end of the matter. That afternoon, I was called into a meeting with Mr. Hill, the company's CEO. I felt anxious when I entered the boss's office, feeling like I was in trouble, even though I didn't really understand what I'd done wrong. I found the boss sitting behind his large oak desk, appearing calm as he wrote an old-school memo using pen and paper. He glanced up at me as I came in, nodding his bald, dome-shaped head as he silently motioned for me to take a seat. The tension inside that room was palpable, and it didn't help that Mr. Hill kept me waiting before he eventually addressed the issue at hand. "Well, Daniel," he eventually said, looking up and meeting my eye with a stern and judgmental gaze. "Do you know why I've asked you to see you today?" I struggled to answer through my dry throat, but ultimately found the words, "Honestly, Mr. Hill, I'm not entirely sure." My boss tutted dismissively and shook his head. "Let me be frank, Daniel. I took a chance in hiring you. We're a close-knit team here at Delio Incorporated, and bringing outsiders in is always a risk. Still, I saw something in you. I thought you could make a valuable contribution to our business, and I still believe so, Daniel." He paused momentarily, looking me directly in the eye before continuing. "I don't want to hear anything more about Conference Room D. It's a no-go area, and for good reasons. Reasons that do not concern you. Don't jeopardize your future here, Daniel. Let this matter drop. Now, am I making myself clear?" I was still baffled by this whole debacle, but I didn't want to go against my employer on an issue that seemed so trivial, especially since I was still in my probationary period. And so I nodded my head submissively and said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Hill, perfectly clear." "Good," he replied with a thin smile. "Now, please get back to work." With that, I left his office and closed the door behind me. Under normal circumstances, that would have been the end of the matter, but events took an unexpected and disturbing turn. It was the strangest thing, but I couldn't stop thinking about that damned annex and the mysterious Conference Room D. For the rest of the afternoon, I found myself staring in the direction of the darkened annex, as something down there was making me feel extremely uneasy. A cold chill ran through me, and yet I couldn't look away. I was glad to leave the office at the end of the day, but had no respite once I returned home. I struggled to sleep that night, and when I did finally drop off, my subconscious was haunted by bizarre and disturbing nightmares. In my dream, I found myself standing in the forbidden annex, freezing and shivering due to an unexplainable cold as the malfunctioning lights flickered on and off above my head. I wanted to turn back and return to the safe part of the office, but something was forcing me forward, pulling me toward the cursed Conference Room D. As I walked forward toward the door, my hand shaking as I reached out for the handle and slowly opened it. The room was shrouded in darkness, with a dim flickering light providing the only illumination. But my focus was on the shadowy figure standing at the far side of the room, a faceless entity that lived in the dark. He had no face or eyes that I could see, and yet I knew he was looking directly at me. More than that, actually. This entity was staring directly into my very soul, infiltrating my subconscious and seeing every one of my dark secrets. I felt naked and exposed in front of this monster, and yet I couldn't resist or even flee from his all-powerful, dark influence. I tried to scream, but couldn't utter a sound. Instead, I was paralyzed, as the shadowy entity used his black magic to slam the door shut behind me, trapping me inside that hellish room where I'd be at his mercy. I went to work on Thursday, but barely made it through the day, as the vivid details of the nightmare remained etched in my mind, and the foreboding threat of Conference Room D hung over me. I tried to tell myself this was all caused by the stress of my new job and the tense encounter with the boss. I hope I'd enjoy a good night's sleep on Thursday and get back to normal. But of course, this didn't happen. The nightmare was even worse that evening, as I was thrust back inside the cursed room with a dark figure standing ominously above me. Once again, I couldn't move or scream as the Shadow Man reached out, surrounding my physical form with his dark power. as every part of my soul was exposed and torn apart. I woke up screaming and drenched in cold sweat, realizing that this was something deeper than workplace stress. I had to drag myself into work on Friday morning. The spooky office was the last place I wanted to be, but I couldn't afford another black mark on my record by taking a sick day. And besides, I wanted answers regarding what was haunting my dreams, and I was sure someone in the office had them. I made it through to Friday lunchtime when I eventually got my opportunity. Entering the break room, I saw Rachel and Carl sitting together, chatting and laughing over their respective meals. Rachel was wearing the cute red top I liked, and when I walked in, she flicked her hair back and smiled sweetly, saying, "Hey, newbie, how you doing today?" I smiled back at the pretty receptionist, momentarily forgetting about my woes as our eyes met. Carl wasn't quite so welcoming towards me, however. "Geez, man, what happened to you?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. "You look like hell." I was annoyed by Carl's frankness, but I had to admit he had a point. 2 sleepless nights in a row and a series of vivid nightmares had left me tired and haggard. I was slightly irritated to be shown up in front of Rachel, as I hadn't forgotten my romantic feelings toward her. I couldn't think of a response in that moment, but thankfully, Rachel broke the silence with an invitation. "Grab yourself a strong cup of coffee, Daniel, and come join us." I felt reassured, helping myself to a hot beverage before I took a seat at the table. "So, what's bothering you, buddy?" Carl asked sarcastically. "Don't tell me you're burnt out already." I laughed nervously before responding. No, man. Just been having trouble sleeping, that's all." I paused before continuing. "But while I've got you guys here, can I ask you a question? What's the deal with Conference Room D?" Felt a sense of deja vu as the atmosphere once again became tense at the mere mention of the mysterious room. Rachel and Carl exchanged knowing looks before Carl answered in a hushed tone. "You don't want to talk about Room D around here, buddy. Trust me." I frowned in confusion. "I don't understand," I replied. "Why is everybody so freaked out over a damn meeting room?" "I'm not freaked out," Carl shot back defensively. "Well, there's some bad history in that room," Rachel offered as an explanation. "Mr. Hill doesn't like us talking about it in the office. He's been known to fire people for bringing it up." "Seriously?" I asked in astonishment. "Old Man Hill won't hear of it," Carl confirmed. "But hey," Rachel added with a smile as she placed her hand on my wrist, "why don't you come out with us for drinks after work? We can tell you the whole sorry tale at the bar." Rachel's invitation seemed genuine, although Carl didn't seem so keen, as perhaps he wanted the receptionist to himself that night. And I was reluctant at first, saying, "Thank you, but I don't think I'd be much company. I'm so zapped I'd probably fall asleep after one drink." "Oh, come on," Rachel said with a sly wink. "You'll get to bond with your colleagues and discover the office's dark secret. How can you pass up such a great opportunity?" "Yeah, man," Carl added, changing his tune as he slapped me playfully on the back. "Come out to play, it'll be fun." I guess I didn't need much persuasion, because my next words were, "Sure, what the hell, count me in." A few hours later, the 3 of us were sitting together at a local bar, laughing and chatting as we downed cocktails. I temporarily forgot about my troubles whilst enjoying the company of my work colleagues, our inhibitions loosened by the alcohol. My attraction to Rachel only grew as the evening went on. I wished it were just the 2 of us, but I'll admit that Carl was good company, telling amusing anecdotes as the drinks went down. We talked about a lot of things during our drinking session, but eventually the topic moved to Conference Room D. "It's really a sad story," Rachel said with a tear in her eye. "Yeah, tragic," Carl added with considerably less sympathy. Rachel ignored him and continued her account in between sips of her daiquiri. Stephen Banks was the boss before Mr. Hill. He ran the company for 10 years, but when the economic downturn hit, Delio was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mr. Banks did everything in his power, but couldn't turn things around. I guess the poor man hit his breaking point. One Friday night, he locked himself in room D and ended his life. They didn't find his body until Monday morning. The business recovered in time, but the tragedy was never forgotten, and Mr. Hill insisted that room D remain closed and locked up. Wow, was the only response I could muster. It was a tragic story, to be sure, and I could understand why a dark shadow had been left over the office. But Carl scoffed before adding his 2 cents. Sure, that's the official story, if you choose to believe it, he said sarcastically. Now, Carl, behave yourself, Rachel said playfully whilst shooting him a look. Hey, Carl replied defensively. I'm just giving Danny boy all the facts. He can make up his own mind. The sales rep shot me a wink. I played along, saying, Well, Carl, why don't you enlighten me? He smiled, took another gulp from his glass, and launched into his story. Sure, Banks was desperate, but he didn't kill himself. Rumor has it he became obsessed with the occult, thought he could make a pact with the devil or some demon to turn the business around. On the night he died, Banks was trying to perform a satanic ritual. I guess it didn't go as planned because he ended up dead, and that damn room has been cursed ever since. I felt my stomach drop after listening to Carl's account, and I guess it showed on my face. Carl had delivered the story with a straight face, but he could control himself no longer, bursting into laughter at my reaction. Jesus, man, he exclaimed while slapping me on my back. You really believe that load of crap? He continued laughing as my face turned bright red with embarrassment. Once again, it was Rachel who came to my rescue, lightly punching Carl in the arm whilst chastising him. Quit teasing him, Carl, it's not funny. The rep held his hands up defensively before replying. I'm sorry, buddy, couldn't resist. But seriously, this whole business with that room, it's crazy. Total BS. I shook my head, taking a drink before replying nervously. The thing is, guys, I've been having some weird dreams these last few nights. Dreams about room D. Carl snorted dismissively. We've all had the nightmares, Rachel confirmed solemnly. Even tough guy Carl. I have a theory about that, Carl added. I think of this as a shared delusion. This urban legend's been drummed up into us for so long. Everybody who's worked in the office has heard the stories, and they're all scared witless by that damn room. But you know, the only way to fight your fears is to confront them. What do you mean? Rachel asked in confusion. I mean, we need to go into the room and prove it's all hokum, Carl said. He glanced at his watch before continuing. Security will have gone home for the night, and you can get us into the office, Rachel. Why don't we do it tonight? I almost spat out my drink at the suggestion. You want to break into Delio's head office after hours, I exclaimed. Come on, man. Don't be so dramatic, Carl responded with mockery. We're Delio employees, and we're not planning on stealing anything, so it's hardly a break-in. Besides, no one will ever know we were there. I felt a nervous energy running through me as I considered Carl's proposal. I was still a probationary employee, and any misdemeanor would likely result in my dismissal. And besides, I wasn't keen to break into Conference Room D after the vivid nightmares I'd suffered. I glanced over at Rachel, hoping for some support. I believe I saw some anxiety in her eyes, but she reached across the table and placed her delicate hand on my wrist before saying, I don't know, Daniel. It could be fun. What do you say? I looked into her deep brown eyes and felt myself falling. It was a stupid decision. I should have walked away, but I guess I was intoxicated, full of drink, my attraction to Rachel, and a macho bravado, because I didn't want to back down in front of Carl. And so I agreed to the foolish plan, saying, "Okay, I'm in." Rachel smiled whilst Carl whooped in triumph, and we downed our drinks and left the bar, making our way back to the empty office. There was a certain degree of excitement shared between the three of us when we entered the abandoned Delio office using Rachel's spare key. I felt like a naughty schoolboy breaking the rules, and I think the others shared my enthusiasm. We were all more than a little tipsy, and this only added to our boldness. The three of us sniggered like children as we crept past the reception and cubicles. The atmosphere only changed once we reached the annex. I can't explain what happened exactly, but I think all of us felt it as we switched on the lights and crept down the dusty corridor. Looking back, I guess the fear I experienced was something primal. There was a voice inside my head screaming at me to walk away. Should have listened, but instead, I followed my companions as we made our way to the locked door of the conference room. Rachel hesitated, the door key shaking in her hand, as she stood in front of the door. She turned toward me with fear now evident in her brown eyes. "I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't do this," she whispered. I didn't respond, but Carl did, tutting loudly before grabbing hold of the key. "For crying out loud, guys. What the hell's wrong with you both? We can't back down now." He was playing the tough guy, but I noticed how Carl was also trembling as he put the key in the lock and took a deep breath before turning it. The door slowly swung open, and we saw what lay inside for the first time. What struck me was how dark the room's interior was. Obviously, the lights were off, but the darkness was more than the absence of illumination. Still, I didn't have much time to dwell on this before Carl fumbled for the switch and turned on the lights. I felt better upon seeing the inside of the room because it seemed so ordinary. There was a long plywood desk in the middle of a carpeted floor, chairs on either side. On the far wall facing us was a flat screen, the television for video conferencing. The room had a musky smell and was obviously in need of vacuuming and dusting, but otherwise it was unremarkable. But when I looked down at the floor, I was shocked to see a dark stain on the carpet. "Oh my God!" Rachel exclaimed. "That's a blood stain!" Carl laughed nervously. "Don't be so squeamish. Let's go in." The sales rep led the way while Rachel and I shared a worried look before entering. To this day, I don't know why we went along with it. I was sure Carl could be persuasive, but it was more than that, like something or someone was pulling us inside. Stepping across the threshold was a significant moment. We were all hit by an icy cold as we entered the room. "It's freezing in here," I muttered. "Yeah, because the heating's off," said Carl. He had an answer for everything, but the confidence in his voice was faltering. "Come on, let's sit down and soak up the atmosphere," Carl added. We all sat around the table, maintaining a tense silence for a moment before Rachel asked a question through trembling lips. "What time is it?" I frowned, looking down at my watch before replying. "It's just coming up on midnight. Why?" She looked me square in the eye, her face turning pale as she muttered, "Midnight? That's when Mr. Banks died." In the next moment, several things happened at once. Firstly, the meeting room door slammed shut, even though none of us were near it. Rachel let out a panicked cry while Carl shouted, "What the hell?" We all jumped up from our chairs in shock. Carl made for the closed door, but a second later, the lights went off, leaving us in total darkness. "Jesus!" I cried out, fumbling for the desk in front of me. "Daniel, where are you?" Rachel called out. I stumbled clumsily toward her voice, but then the lights flickered before coming back on. And when our eyes adjusted, we discovered we were no longer alone. All hell broke loose when we saw him. Rachel screamed in terror whilst Carl collapsed onto the floor, his bravado gone as he cowered in the corner. I'm glad to say I showed more courage, lifting a chair in an effort to defend myself and my companions. But the being before us could not be defeated by physical means. The ghostly entity had appeared out of nowhere, emerging from the darkness to confront us. The man, if you can describe him as such, was sitting casually on the chair opposite us, dressed in an expensive but clearly soiled suit, with his tie undone and his shirt ruffled. But that's not what drew my attention in horror. His face was pale as milk, his eyes black and lifeless, and worst of all, his throat was sliced open from ear to ear. "Oh, God!" Rachel screamed. "It's Mr. Banks! He's back!" The entity opened his bone-dry lips and spoke in a deep, inhuman voice, saying, "Actually, dear, I never left." "No!" Carl cried, his previously cool composure melting away. "This isn't possible. You can't be real." The spirit of Mr. Banks didn't answer. Instead, he merely glared at Carl with his deadpan eyes. At this, the sales rep broke, abandoning us as he sprinted for the door and desperately tried to escape from the haunted room, only to find we were locked in. "I suggest you all calm down and take a seat," the spirit ordered. "We have matters to discuss." Why, I cannot say, but as terrified as we were, all three of us complied with the spirit's instructions, nervously sitting opposite him across the conference table whilst he coolly observed us. "It's been some time since anyone has dared enter my cursed prison," Banks announced. "Why have you three disturbed my slumber?" "We're sorry," Rachel blubbered. "We shouldn't have come. It was a mistake. Please, let us go. We'll never disturb you again." Banks formed his crusty, colorless lips into what could be considered a smile before answering, "I'm sorry, my dear, but it's not up to me. We must all answer to him." He pointed towards the far wall with his bony finger, and, as if on command, the television screen burst to life, revealing a vision of inexplicable horror. Set upon a background of burning crimson red was the shadow man I had seen in my nightmares, a humanoid figure of pure black without any discernible physical features. He had no eyes, and yet I could tell he was staring straight at me. Worse, the monster could see through my outer skin, invading my psyche and infiltrating my very soul. I tried to move, but couldn't. I wasn't even able to open my mouth to scream. I guess my companions were in the same horrifying predicament, because all three of us were frozen in our chairs, entirely at the mercy of this shadowy beast. Because the demon was more than just pixels on a screen, it was there on the far side of a porous membrane, apparently on the brink of breaking through. "I'm afraid I did something quite reckless all those years ago," Banks explained solemnly, as we three remained trapped in our seats. "In my desperation, I opened a portal to his world, leading the beast straight to this little room. Thankfully, he cannot leave here, and I remain as a gatekeeper of sorts, my soul doomed to dwell between these four walls until Judgment Day. Conference Room D is kept under lock and key for good reason, because anyone who enters is at the mercy of the beast. You shouldn't have come here." His statement was an obvious one. We'd been very foolish, ignoring all warnings and placing ourselves in extreme danger. But Banks wasn't quite finished. "Believe it or not, the beast is not entirely unreasonable. He's willing to forgive transgressions up to a point, but there's a price to pay. 3 of you entered, but only 2 can leave. The choice is yours." At that moment, we regained some level of control over our bodies. I was able to turn my head and lift my arm, and instinctively I reached out to Rachel and took her hand. She met my gaze and squeezed my hand, and in that moment, we made our joint decision. "Very well," Banks said firmly. "Leave now, both of you, and don't look back." We stood up together, our feet shaking, and slowly walked hand in hand toward the door, which was now wide open. I didn't want to look back, but Carl shouted after us in fury and terror. "No! Come back! You can't leave me here!" Carl had regained control of his vocal cords, but couldn't move from his seat. I made the mistake of looking into his wide eyes and felt a pang of guilt, which made me pause. But Rachel pulled me forward, whispering in my ear, "He got us into this, Daniel. There's no other way." And I knew she was right. So I pulled myself away and continued toward the exit. The last vision I had inside that room was horrifying, as the shadowy beast exited the screen and tore forward, attacking a screaming Carl with his dark form. Carl's tie tightened around his throat, cutting off his airflow and slowly throttling him. That was the last thing I saw as we retreated out into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind us. We reported the incident straight away, but it was already too late. Carl was dead by the time the paramedics arrived. There was CCTV footage of the three of us entering the office together, but no coverage of the events in Conference Room D. The cops questioned Rachel and me about Carl's death, but there was no evidence of foul play, and so we were both released without charge. We didn't get off entirely, however, as Mr. Hill fired both of us without hesitation. I can't say I blamed him. Rachel and I have met up a few times since the incident. We alone know the truth of what happened that night, but our relationship will never recover, and we'll both carry the guilt to our graves. I often think of Conference Room D as the shadowy beast continues to haunt my nightmares. I fear Carl is still trapped in there, his soul forever stuck between this world and the next. Sadly, I can't turn back the clock, but I pray that no one repeats our fatal mistake, and the door to Conference Room D remains firmly locked. That was Conference Room D by Mark Lynch, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
Nothing like a company meeting where the agenda item is you.
When even the break room fridge whispers to leave it alone, you leave it alone.
If you enjoyed tonight's journey through haunted marionettes, cursed conference rooms, twisted memories, and houses that don't forget, you're in luck. There's more waiting for you in the patrons area. Extended, ad-free episodes featuring bonus tales and exclusive horrors you won't hear anywhere else.
It's just $7.99 a month, or save big with a yearly plan, and it gives you full access to every story, every scream, without a single commercial break. You'll be supporting indie horror and making sure the doors to the dark stay open.
To join, just head to simplyscarypodcast.com and click the Patrons tab, or go straight to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to become a member. Come closer to the stories, if you dare.
From all of us here at Chilling Entertainment, thank you for your support.
If tonight's episode proved anything, it's that some places aren't just haunted, they're hungry. A seance that pulls you too far, a puppet shop that blurs the line between wood and flesh, an office annex that hides more than files, a tribunal that sentences you to your own guilt, and a childhood home that remembers things you thought you left behind.
Tonight was a reminder that some thresholds are meant to stay closed and some regrets should never be revisited. But horror doesn't wait for permission. It seeps through old doors, hidden tunnels, and faces you almost recognize.
If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our parent channel, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, on YouTube, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new nightmare.
And if your craving for darkness goes even deeper, swing by my other show, Otis Jiry's Tales from Duskwood, where an entire season's worth of dark tales is waiting for you. You'll find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you haunt your ears.
We also want to hear from you. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram and tell us which story kept you checking the corners of your room tonight, or which one you'll never dare to reread alone.
And let's not forget to thank the extraordinary authors who guided us through tonight's unseen corridors. Without their imaginations, we might still believe the dark was empty.
But empty places are never really empty for long. So next time you hear something moving behind the wall, see a puppet's smile just a little too wide, or feel a door breathing against your hand,
remember, some things weren't just left behind, they're still waiting.
Sleep well, listeners.
If you can.
Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's otis@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?